Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be tearing down the front differential from that 2018 Jeep Grand Cherokee Trackhawk. So if you have watched the videos, it was from that burnt Trackhawk that I got probably a year ago now. And I've been using it in a bunch of the other parts for mock-up. So I just pulled the transmission apart and found out that the case isn't usable for me to build the tranny, but it's still a good transmission. So I'm going to do the same thing to the front differential, the rear differential, as well as the transfer case. And I'm going to start going through some of this stuff so I can get either whatever I need to make it good, or use it as parts because the cases are no good. Kind of like I showed in the last video, this Grand Cherokee SRT transmission, where you can see it got so hot that it bubbled. So I'm going to do the same thing to this, pull this all the way apart, see what's good inside. I'm guessing all of the clutches and all that internal parts, the shaft and etc. are still good, so I could utilize those all as parts, but obviously the case is not good. So the Trackhawk front differential right here, I don't know, it's missing the bushing. It burnt all the way out. The other bushings don't look that bad, but they probably aren't that great. So I want to make sure there isn't any issues with the case. Obviously you can see that there is some damage right here from this bushing being gone and it just kind of doing whatever it was doing on the way here from Florida. Also in the front, some of the fins are missing. So the case isn't 100% good, but all of the internals are probably fine. I'm guessing that this is fine as long as there isn't any cracking. I had a concern right here that was a crack, but I'm not 100% sure until I unbolt it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this thing all the way apart, get it ready, see if the case is still usable, and if it isn't, you can't get another case. I think I might be able to use just a normal front differential case from like an SXT or a GT, Durango, or Grand Cherokee, but I'd have to buy one. Dodge, I don't believe, sells the cases separate for the front differential, the transmission, or the transfer case, or the rear differential. So that's kind of an issue, but let's get this thing apart, see what's usable in it, and see if the case is good. So first things first, we're going to remove this 32mm nut right here. Just slides right out. You can see that the seal still looks good, so it doesn't look like it got that hot, which is a good thing. These two 16mm right here. Little vent tube right here. This little pry right there. It's a nice slip fit, so make sure not to give her the sideways. So I thought this was a crack. I'm still, yeah, see how that's cracked all the way through? That's what I was kind of worried about. And that's what happens with these right here. If anything hits this, it pretty much is going to end up cracking it. And I wish Dodge would sell this piece as a separate piece, because I have 4 diffs, front differentials, that all have this piece that were in accidents, that this is bad and the diff is still good. So that's no good, which is unfortunate. So all of these little ones are 10mm E-Torques. Last but not least, the 4 16mm. Now just flip it over, give it a few whacks, and she comes out as one whole unit, seals and all. You can see that all the internals are still good. The case doesn't look bad, but like I said, this one had, you can see all those broken fins right there, is kind of an issue where you can see there's a snap ring right there as well on both sides that hold. Don't mix up your shims. I haven't measured these, but usually the shims are different thicknesses to make sure this is in the correct orientation with the pinion. But if I was just cleaning this housing up, I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to reuse it. If I was just going to clean this housing up and then go and put this all back in the same housing, you can just go and use the same shims. The issue is if I have to use a different housing, I'm going to have to measure for the correct shim width. Plus, if you put new bearings in it, sometimes you want to also measure for shims for, you know, to have correct tooth engagement as well as the correct pinion height. I'm not sure if this one has a crush washer in it yet because I haven't got it out, but I want to check all of the teeth on this differential to make sure there isn't any issues. You can see it looks like there's some coking on there, so I'm guessing this did get pretty hot, but it didn't get hot enough to burn these bushings out on this case. So other than this piece that's cracked, so we should be okay. Let's get all this out of here. All these teeth on this front diff look good. They barely even look broken in. You could still see the hatch in the teeth. So this Trackhawk had, I think, 3,000 miles, which it doesn't even look like it's barely even warm. Look at that. Usually these get all perfectly smooth and shiny after a while. So now what I need to do is I need to press the pinion out of the front differential, and to do that I need to get my press working. So it needs hydraulic fluid, and what I have is I have some automatic transmission fluid which should work the same. I think I have enough in here. I think there's about 2 quarts left because I redid my transfer case fluid in my F350, and I think we'll be good. So let's fill it from the top, and I'm sure there's going to be some sort of bleeding procedure that I'm going to have to go through. So I got the press filled up with some ATF, and now look at this. She is a monster. It's working. The cool thing about this press is you have like this big, like long stroke cylinder, and then you have this smaller, like fine-tuned cylinder, which is really nice when you're pressing bearings and bushings out. So I'm glad this is working again. I kind of overfilled it, so once I release it, she leaks a little bit of fluid out each time. But once it finally gets to whatever level it's supposed to be at, we'll be good to go. And now I just need to figure out where I'm going to put this. So what I need to do is pull the engine hoist out of my truck, and this thing, by 2 people, if I have a friend here, I could lift this up and we could put the pins in, or if I had it already up, it'd be easy to move those bottom pins and move it up and down. But since it's all the way down, it's not on any pins, it's a little bit more difficult. So I'm gonna just use the engine hoist to lift her up. Now what I'm gonna do is press the pinion out, have the bottom base all the way where it needs to be. It actually was the perfect height. Look at that. So now we'll get that done. I was thinking about putting wood under it since this is aluminum housing, but since the housing really isn't that good, I'm probably not going to end up reusing it, so I'm not too worried about it. The great thing about having the press up and running again is I have so many attachments for the press. As you can see right there, I also have a full set of dimple dies for the press and a bunch of other stuff. So this thing, for fabrication and doing stuff like this, is just going to come in so much handy. I now have everything pressed out of the front Trackhawk differential, and I'm very happy the press is back together. It works. no issues with it. I just need to move it from right there to over there, but I need to move the Golf Synchro, and I need 2 people to move this car. So you wouldn't think this car was so heavy, but it's almost as hard to move. Actually, it's probably just as hard to move as a Hellcat station wagon, or if the VR4 didn't run. They're probably not the same weight. This thing feels really heavy because it's all-wheel drive. I would really like to weigh it and see how much it weighs, but pushing this, one person cannot move this car by themselves. I can move this car by myself, but I can't move this car. It doesn't make sense. So I got this front differential apart, and there's a few interesting things that I've never seen in a differential before. The first thing is the ring doesn't come off of the housing. It's all one piece. So that is very interesting, which it kind of sucks, because if you wanted to go with a front one-way LSD like you do in R32s, R33s, R34s, or anything that's Japanese and all-wheel drive, you usually put like a one-way or a 1.5 way in the front. You couldn't do it with this because you couldn't get the ring off of the housing. So you'd have to have a whole new ring made. I don't think Dodge has any front LSD assemblies that would bolt into this front differential. So that's one weird thing. The second weird thing is these races. So these races have a very aggressive profile to them. As you see, there's not very much in terms of meat. Look at that. Usually there's a nice contact surface for the bearing to roll on. I mean, there still is, but down on the bottom it's very thin. And then you come to the cage, which is plastic. The balls are still steel, obviously, but the cage is plastic, which kind of makes me think, when I pulled that transfer case from the Grand Cherokee SRT8, I guess it was an SRT8, but it sounded like there was a ball bearing rolling around in the transfer case, and that Grand Cherokee was hit really hard. So what might have happened, as you see, these are also plastic cages. It could have popped, could have broke the plastic cage in the wreck and popped a bearing out in between the pinion. Not sure. I need to take it apart to see. The other weird thing about this whole front differential is this. I haven't seen a bearing like this since a Mini Cooper. Like the original Mini Coopers, they had the transmission in the oil pan, and they had a bearing just like this, a little bit, actually a lot bit smaller, and it was very expensive. As you can see, it's one race for 2 bearings, and it still has those very aggressive profiles, like this is the back one closer to the yoke, or whatever you want to call it, and this is closer to the pinion. Usually the larger bearing is always going to be closer to the pinion. But it's just really strange that Dodge went from, a single, or most companies use a single bearing here, or even tapered roller bearings on this and this, which kind of explains why they must have a crush washer. So I'd have to get another one of these when I reassemble it, because you have to torque it and crush it and measure the pinion height, which really is inconvenient. So I know a lot of people, when their F350s and their diesels start to sound like they have a lot of backlash in the differential, they just tighten down their pinion nut more, which crushes this washer more, which is technically not a good thing, because then it pulls the pinion away from the teeth more, and it's just some people do it. It's not correct, but it also does work. So I don't know if I could end up replacing this with a roller bearing, a large roller bearing, and this as well, like on a Nissan differential, which I feel is a lot more durable than this. This works, but it's also on the front differential, and it just has me very concerned about this plastic cage. And if it was a single tapered bearing in the near the pinion and then a tapered bearing here, I wouldn't need this because I could set the pinion height correctly with the spacer, the correct spacer, and then the tapered bearing would hold it in. The reason they don't, it should still hold it in with this bearing, but that's probably why they have this crush washer in there to set the pinion height. So I don't know, it's just a few weird things that I noticed. The rest of the stuff is pretty common, you know, common seals, all the part numbers are on all these bearings. I kind of want to look up what this is or what these bearings cost, because I feel like these are going to be, or this bearing right here by itself is going to be very expensive. And then maybe even look up to see if they have a front one way or 1.5 way. Another thing I did notice when I took this apart is, I think I said it previously, this piece of the housing is cracked, and it seems like anytime a Trackhawk, a Durango Hellcat, or even the base models that have these front differentials get wrecked, this part of the housing always gets cracked, broken, whatever, and you can't buy this piece separately from Dodge, which I think Dodge should sell this as a separate piece, because a lot of people are having to buy full differentials when they just need this one piece that cracked from the accident. So we can see, you know, there is a part number and stuff on it, but I have looked to see if you can order it, and it's not available. So then there's a seal and a little roller bearing in there to support the axle shaft that comes out, because it's it's longer and it goes in there. But the rest of it, you know, there are a few weird things, like this is 2 parts. I think the Supras are like that as well, but I'm really happy that this is all apart and I can start cleaning stuff up. I need to get my puller for my house. You can see there's a groove right here for this race, and it's kind of nice. You just put your puller right in there if you have the correct one, which I do, and it just pulls it out really nice. And you can see there's some spacers in there. So they set the pinion height, it looks like they set it 2 ways, which is kind of weird, but all that stuff is nice and clean and ready to be cleaned up more and stored, because I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this diff, because I can't get that piece, and this isn't that great of a housing, as you can see, but it's not that bad as well. I mean, it's still a usable housing. There's no cracks other than that piece right there. So I'm going to end the video here. Super happy that this thing is apart. I know what's wrong with it. I didn't think that was bad, but if I didn't pull it apart, I probably would have ran it, and then it would have leaked a bunch of oil everywhere, or it would have just blown that thing apart once I launched it, and it would have just been a catastrophe. So always look into stuff like this, because there are little things that you might not notice, and those hairline cracks are very hard to see, but once you get to the inside, you can really see them really well. Super interesting pulling this front differential apart. It had a lot of things that I haven't seen in a front or a rear differential before, like those, you know, those cages, and the pinion bearing had the 2 races in one, which I'm guessing that bearing is very, very expensive. But if you like these videos, make sure to click the subscribe button, thumbs up, throw a comment below. As always, see you guys next time.